In April of 1841, Silas Rutledge issued a proclamation that stunned even the most hardened plantation owners in South Carolina. He was placing his 28-year-old daughter, Catherine, a woman weighing over 260 pounds, under the complete dominion of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross. Not as a caretaker, not as an attendant, but as her master in every sense that mattered, save for the legal documents. The white society of Colleton County was scandalized, but they had no inkling of Rutledge's true purpose, nor what Ezekiel Cross would enact upon Catherine in the months to follow. By November, Catherine's body had transformed in ways no one could comprehend. 13 men were dead, and Cypress Grove plantation was reduced to smoldering ash. What truly transpired between that enslaved man and the planter's daughter? What did he do to her that left every witness trembling with terror? The story you are about to hear is sealed within a mystery that should have remained buried. But before we step into the shadows, ensure you are guarded. Subscribe, ring that bell, and declare your presence in the comments. It may seem a simple gesture, but it is our only way to endure this account together. Now, let me guide you back to where it all started. Spring in Colleton County arrived with a suffocating heat and humidity that rendered the air thick and heavy. The Combahee River slid sluggishly through the low country, its dark waters mirroring the Spanish moss that draped from live oaks like funeral veils. Rice paddies extended for miles, their flooded fields worked by hundreds of enslaved people who labored knee-deep in water from first light until dusk. This was wealth constructed on anguish, prosperity wrung from human agony, all of it rationalized by men who had persuaded themselves that brutality was merely the natural order. Cypress Grove plantation sprawled across 800 acres of moderately fertile land. Its proprietor, Silas Rutledge, did not quite rank among the county's elite, but he yearned desperately to join their ranks. He owned 58 enslaved people, a number that marked him as wealthy by common standards, yet placed him firmly in the middle tier of local society. The truly powerful families held thousands of acres and hundreds of slaves. They summered in Charleston and sent their offspring to northern universities. Their names carried a weight that could open any door or shatter any reputation with a single utterance. Silas had married Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, a union that bestowed upon him modest land holdings and a respectable surname. Elizabeth had been a pragmatic woman who maintained meticulous ledgers and appeared more concerned with profit margins than social ascension. She died during childbirth in 1813, leaving behind a daughter named Catherine. For 28 years, Silas raised Catherine alone, pouring his energies into breaching the inner circles of county influence. He was a tall man, gaunt in the manner of those who neglect sustenance when consumed by fixation. His hair had silvered prematurely, lending him a severe look that matched his frigid disposition. In business, he was known as shrewd yet sufficiently honorable, the sort of man who drove hard bargains but kept his word. His daughter Catherine had matured in isolation, educated by tutors, never truly belonging anywhere. By 1841, she was 28 years old and weighed nearly 260 pounds. Her body was bloated from years of medications prescribed by physicians who diagnosed her with hysteria and female nervous disorders. She suffered violent episodes where she would shriek and hurl objects. The previous year, she had assaulted her father with a letter opener, leaving a scar across his left hand. The white society of Colleton County whispered about her with feigned sympathy. Poor Silas Rutledge, saddled with a deranged daughter. What a tragedy. She had been such a lovely child. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew what Catherine had witnessed when she was 12 years old, or that her madness was not insanity at all, but a rational reaction to dwelling among monsters. The letter arrived on April 7th, delivered by a private courier. Silas opened it in his study, anticipating business correspondence. Instead, he discovered 3 pages on costly paper, sealed with red wax bearing a symbol he recognized instantly. A scythe, crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the Brethren of the Harvest. The Brethren were 13 men who gathered in darkness to conduct rites they believed fortified the land through blood sacrifice. They blended ancient European traditions with beliefs appropriated from enslaved people who understood spirits and power. They were convinced that the strong were destined to consume the weak, literally when the situation demanded. Silas had been initiated in 1822. He had attended perhaps 40 gatherings over 19 years, taking part in rituals that ranged from disturbing to monstrous. The letter informed him he was in debt, $12,000 borrowed over years of gambling losses and failed ventures, an impossible sum. Repayment would necessitate selling most of his land and all his slaves, demolishing everything he had built. But the letter proposed an alternative, a demonstration of dedication from members in precarious positions. Silas would take his daughter Catherine and place her under the total authority of one of his enslaved men, not temporarily, not as punishment, but as a genuine transfer of responsibility lasting 1 full year. The enslaved man would possess absolute command over her person, her daily routines, her treatment. Silas would announce this publicly at an assembly of the county's prominent families, presenting it as an extreme medical measure for his daughter's condition. The humiliation would be absolute. In a society where white women were purportedly cherished and protected above all else, Silas would be proclaiming his daughter of lesser worth than his property. But if he consented, his debt would be forgiven, and the brethren would furnish financial backing to restore his standing. Silas remained in his study for hours that night. He weighed his options. Bankruptcy would annihilate him completely. The brethren had ties to every judge, every lawyer, every politician in the region. They could make him vanish if he became a liability, or he could sacrifice his daughter's dignity to preserve his own position, the choice his society had conditioned him to make. Property over people, power over morality. He penned his acceptance by candlelight and dispatched it before dawn. 3 days later, another letter arrived with a name and a brief history. Ezekiel Cross, age 33. Purchased recently through an intermediary from a Virginia plantation. Skills included carpentry and herbal medicine. Temperament described as quiet and obedient. What the letter did not disclose was that Ezekiel Cross had been chosen specifically for this purpose, that his placement at Cypress Grove was no coincidence, that he carried his own searing need for justice and the patience to await the precise moment. Ezekiel arrived on April 13th in a wagon driven by a slave trader named Henderson. The wagon pulled directly up to the main house, unusual since most transactions involving slaves occurred near the barns. Silas emerged onto the porch, shading his eyes against the morning sun. In the wagon bed sat Ezekiel. The first thing Silas noted was his eyes. Most enslaved individuals kept their gaze lowered as a survival tactic, but Ezekiel looked directly at Silas, his expression calm and evaluative. It unsettled Silas profoundly. Ezekiel was tall, perhaps 6'2", with broad shoulders and lean muscle forged by a lifetime of arduous labor. His skin was unmarred by whip scars. His clothes were simple but clean. His hands were large and calloused. Yet his fingers possessed a precision that hinted at skilled work rather than mere brute force. Henderson climbed down and handed papers to Silas. Ezekiel Cross, as requested. Previous owner said he was quiet but capable. Your associates want you to know this one was carefully selected. Silas barely glanced at the documents. He addressed Ezekiel directly. You understand why you are here? Yes, sir. Ezekiel's voice was deep and measured, bearing a slight Virginia accent. My daughter is unwell. You will be responsible for her care. Physicians have failed. You claim knowledge of herbal treatments. My grandmother was a healer, sir. She taught me before I was sold. The transaction concluded swiftly. Ezekiel was shown to a small cabin near the main house, separate from the other slave quarters. He was provided basic supplies and informed his duties would commence the following day. He was told his sole responsibility was Catherine's care and that failure would bring severe consequences. Ezekiel nodded and said yes, sir, when required. Then he was left alone. For the first time since arriving, he permitted his expression to shift, his jaw unclenching slightly, his shoulders relaxing. He sat on the bed and drew from inside his shirt a small cloth bundle. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a worn piece of paper with 3 names inscribed in a child's unsteady script. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. His wife, his son, his daughter, sold away from him 3 years prior to a plantation in Alabama notorious for working slaves to death. He had learned they all perished within 18 months. Sarah from an untreated fever, Benjamin from an injury that turned septic, Ruth from simply surrendering, a 6-year-old child who ceased eating because she could not fathom why her family had been torn apart. And Silas Rutledge had been the one to sell them, not because he required funds, not because they had committed any offense, but because he had been demonstrating to the brethren that he could make ruthless decisions without sentiment. He had splintered a family like kindling for burning. Ezekiel had spent 2 years working his way south, deliberately being sold from plantation to plantation, always collecting information. He learned about the brethren through whispers. He learned about their rituals and members. He learned they considered themselves beyond any repercussion. When the opportunity arose to be sold to Rutledge specifically, Ezekiel knew this was his chance. He would have access to Rutledge's house, to his secrets, to his vulnerabilities. And sometimes justice arrived not from courts or statutes, but from patience and scheming, and a willingness to become precisely as monstrous as necessary. He refolded the paper bearing the 3 names and tucked it away. Then he lay back and stared at the ceiling, commencing his plans for what would follow. His first day began on April 14th. A house slave named Judith, middle-aged with graying hair, escorted him to Catherine's room on the 2nd floor. She knocked hesitantly. "Miss Catherine, your father has brought someone to assist with your treatments." A crash from within, something heavy striking the wall. Then Catherine's voice, slurred yet venomous. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith glanced at Ezekiel with sympathy. "She has difficult days. This is one." Ezekiel opened the door and stepped inside, closing it before Judith could enter. The chamber was spacious but dim. Heavy curtains were drawn. The air was stale, smelling of unwashed bedding and something else, the cloying rot of mercury. Books lay scattered across the floor. A shattered picture frame rested against the wall. Garments were strewn everywhere. Catherine sat in a chair by the cold fireplace, wrapped in a stained dressing gown. Her dark hair hung loose and matted. Her face was puffy, her eyes unfocused. Her hands trembled incessantly on the chair arms. She looked at Ezekiel with confusion, then fear, then fury. "Who are you?" I said. "No more doctors." "I'm not a doctor, miss. My name is Ezekiel. Your father asked me to help you." "Help?" She laughed harshly. "That is what they all claim. Help, treatment, medicine. They mean poison. They mean chains. They mean silence." She stood abruptly, swaying. "I know what this is. He is punishing me again for remembering, for speaking, for refusing to forget." Ezekiel stood motionless, non-threatening. "What are you supposed to forget?" The question caught her off guard. Her anger flickered into something more vulnerable. "You do not know." "I know nothing, miss. Only that your father says you are unwell." Catherine studied him intently, as if truly seeing him for the first time. "You are not from here." "Virginia originally, miss." "Do you know what occurs in this house? What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's pulse quickened, but he maintained a neutral expression. "I do not know what you mean." "Liar. No heat in it. Just exhaustion. Everyone lies. It is simpler than truth." She sat heavily. "Leave me alone. Tell my father his newest torment failed." But Ezekiel moved to the window and drew back the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room. Catherine cried out, shielding her eyes. "When did you last go outside, miss?" "I cannot walk that far. I am too feeble." "When did you last eat without laudanum?" "The medicine is necessary. The doctors say so." "What if the doctors are mistaken?" Her hands lowered from her eyes. She stared at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "What did you say?" Ezekiel turned from the window. This was the moment the first card played. "I said, what if the doctors are mistaken? What if everything you have been told about your condition is designed not to help you, but to keep you controllable? What if your father has been poisoning you for years to ensure you never become well enough to speak about what you witnessed?" Absolute silence. Catherine's eyes widened, her trembling hands stilled. For 30 seconds she simply sat there, her mind working. When she spoke, her voice was different, clearer. "He told you." "Your father told me nothing, miss. But I have eyes. I recognize mercury poisoning. I know the effects of long-term laudanum use. Healthy women do not become like this without someone laboring to make them so." "Why would you say this?" Suspicion crept back. "This is a trick. You are testing me." I am telling you I can help you become truly well, clear-minded, strong enough to walk out of this room. But it will not be simple. Your body has been dependent on those medicines for years. Ceasing will be agonizing. You will feel worse before better, and your father will not approve. Then why would you do it? Ezekiel met her gaze. Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Rutledge to suffer. And the most effective way to make him suffer is to return to him a daughter who is sane enough to recall everything and strong enough to speak of it. The truth. Perilous to voice so plainly. But Catherine was damaged, not foolish. She would see through manipulation, but genuine common cause she might believe. You desire vengeance against my father? Yes, miss. What did he do to you? He sold my family, my wife and 2 children. Sent them to their deaths for no reason except to prove something to people who measure worth by cruelty. Catherine absorbed this, then nodded slowly. The brethren. He sold them for the brethren, not a question. The brethren, miss? You will learn. Everyone learns eventually. She leaned forward. If I agree, if I permit you to help me, what happens then? You get well, miss. And when you are well, we decide what comes next. I have my vengeance to plan. You have yours. Perhaps they align. Catherine studied him intently. Finally, she spoke. I want them all dead. My father, Judge Pelling, Reverend Crenshaw, all of them. Every man who stood in that cellar. I want them to suffer first, to know it is coming, to beg. Then I want them dead. The venom was shocking, not for its intensity, but because it came from someone dismissed as mad and harmless. This was not madness. This was rage concentrated by years of suppression. Ezekiel nodded. Then we have an understanding, Miss Catherine. If we are conspirators, use my name. I cannot, miss. Not where anyone might overhear. We must be cautious. Then know something, Ezekiel. Catherine's eyes glittered dangerously. I have killed before. 3 people, house slaves who might have informed my father about my lucid moments. I cannot recall precisely how. The laudanum blurs everything, but I know I did it. They vanished. Their families were told they ran away. She smiled terribly. So if you intend to betray me, to use me, then dispose of me, know that I am not a victim. I am something worse. Ice traced down Ezekiel's spine. He had anticipated an ally, not someone whose capacity for violence might surpass his own. But he remained steady. I believe you, miss, and I will not betray you. Good. Catherine stood more steadily. Then let us begin. But I have one condition. When this is over, when we have had our vengeance, I want to die. I do not wish to live with what I have seen and done. You will assist me with that as well. Agreed. Ezekiel had not expected that, but he was committed now. Agreed. Then we have a bargain. Catherine extended her hand. After a hesitation, Ezekiel shook it. Her grip was stronger than anticipated. Over the subsequent week, Ezekiel initiated Catherine's treatment. He gradually reduced her laudanum, substituting some with herbal tinctures, valerian root for anxiety and sleep, chamomile for digestive distress, milk thistle to aid her liver in processing accumulated toxins. The process was brutal. Catherine spent 3 days in bed with fever, shaking and vomiting. Ezekiel remained with her through it, holding a basin while she was ill, wiping her face with cool cloths, speaking softly just to remind her she was not alone. When the worst passed, she was frail but clearer than she had been in years. The constant tremor diminished. Her speech was less slurred. She could concentrate on reading. Then the genuine work commenced. Ezekiel had her walking short distances at first, from her room to the hallway's end and back. It exhausted her, but he insisted every day a little farther. He modified her diet, bringing lean meats and vegetables instead of heavy pastries. He limited portions strictly, though she resisted him. Years of using food as comfort made restriction arduous. While working on her physical recovery, they conversed. Catherine told him about the cellar, about what she had witnessed at 12. She described it in detail that turned Ezekiel's stomach, but he listened without interruption. She told him about the years of gaslighting that followed, her father convincing everyone, including herself, that she was insane, that she had fabricated memories, that nothing she uttered could be trusted. She told him about the journal she kept concealed, pages documenting dates and times when her father departed late at night, names of visitors at peculiar hours, sounds from below that should not be possible. Ezekiel told her about his family, about Sarah, who sang while working and taught their children to read despite the peril, about Benjamin, who at 8 could perform mathematics that astonished overseers, about Ruth, who adored flowers and gathered wild blooms to make their cabin beautiful. He told her how Silas came to the Virginia plantation with a buyer's warrant, how he inspected them like livestock, how he agreed to purchase all 3 for a reasonable price, then altered the terms at the final moment, stating he only required the woman and children, not Ezekiel, how he deliberately severed the family for no practical reason, but simply because he could. He smiled when he did it, Ezekiel said quietly. That is what I remember most. My son weeping, clutching my leg, pleading. My wife trying to be strong, telling Benjamin to be brave, and your father smiled as if it pleased him to inflict that pain. Catherine listened with newly lucid eyes. I am sorry. I know sorry is merely a word, but I am sorry you suffered because of what my father is. You are not accountable for what he does, miss. No, but I am accountable for what I do next. And I promise you, Ezekiel, he will pay for what he took from you. They will all pay. The formal announcement was scheduled for April 29th, 41. Individuals gathered in the Cypress Grove dining room for what the invitations described as an important family announcement. The county's elite arrived in carriages, Judge Pelling with his wife Eleanor, Reverend Crenshaw with his daughter, Marcus Fanning and his family, Benjamin Lyle from the bank. The meal was elaborate: oysters, roasted duck, multiple rice dishes, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, a towering cake for dessert. Throughout it all, Catherine sat at her father's right hand, eating sparingly, speaking when addressed, but offering nothing voluntarily. Ezekiel served alongside other house slaves, moving quietly, refilling glasses, clearing plates. He was invisible to most guests, but he absorbed every word, observed every interaction, stored away information. After dessert, Silas stood and tapped his glass. My friends, thank you for joining us. As you know, Catherine has been unwell for years. We attempted every treatment, doctors from Charleston, a specialist from Philadelphia. Nothing aided her. Until recently, he gestured toward Ezekiel. A fortnight ago, I brought in Ezekiel, who possesses knowledge of herbal medicine. As you can see, Catherine is much improved. Clearer, calmer, more herself than in many years. Polite murmurs circulated the table. Catherine kept her expression neutral, though Ezekiel saw her hands gripping her napkin beneath the table. This improvement, Silas continued, has led to a difficult decision. Catherine requires ongoing care more intensive than our household can furnish. After profound consideration, I have decided Ezekiel will assume full responsibility for my daughter's welfare. He will possess complete authority over her treatment, daily activities, and living arrangements effective immediately. The murmurs shifted in tone. Confusion now. Several guests exchanged glances. Mrs. Pelling's face registered shock. Marcus Fanning spoke up. Silas, I do not comprehend. You are placing your daughter under a slave's care. Permanently. I am placing her with someone who succeeded where others failed. My daughter's health is more crucial than social convention. But surely, Reverend Crenshaw interjected carefully, there are other options. A companion, a nurse, someone more appropriate. Silas's expression hardened. I have made my decision. Catherine agrees. Do you not, daughter? All eyes turned to Catherine. This was the moment she could refuse, could expose everything, could bring it all crashing down. Instead, she smiled, small, controlled, revealing nothing. I trust my father's judgment. Ezekiel has been kind, and his treatments help. I am content with this arrangement, perfectly delivered. But Ezekiel saw what others did not, saw her knuckles white on that napkin, saw the flash in her eyes promising violence. She was performing the required role, the obedient daughter. But inside she was screaming. The evening passed in awkward conversation. Some guests departed early. Others lingered to speak with Silas privately, posing questions they did not want public. Ezekiel caught fragments. Are you certain this is wise? What will people say? The brethren will not approve of this becoming public. That last from Judge Pelling, spoken low near the study. Silas's response was too quiet to hear, but whatever he said made Pelling nod and clap his shoulder. By midnight, all guests had departed. Catherine retired to her room. Silas proceeded to his study. Ezekiel assisted with cleanup, then made his way upstairs. He knocked softly on Catherine's door. "Enter." She sat by the window, still in her dinner dress, gazing out at the dark grounds. She did not turn. "It is done, then. I am officially your responsibility. Property of property. How absurd. How are you feeling, miss? I desire to burn this house down with everyone in it, but we must be patient. Is that not what you tell me?" "Yes, miss. I agreed because I want them to feel secure. I want them to believe this is merely my father's eccentricity. I want them to forget about me while we labor." She turned to look at him. "Did you observe their faces? The disgust, the pity. They think I am pathetic. They have no conception of what we are plotting." "And what precisely are we plotting, miss?" Catherine moved to her dresser and withdrew a wooden box. Inside were papers covered in her handwriting. "I have been documenting everything I recall for years. Dates, names, ritual descriptions, coded so it appears as nonsense if discovered. But I can decipher it. We possess enough to ruin 20 men. And will anyone credit us, miss? A woman recently recovered from madness and an enslaved man. No, which is why we require proof. Evidence they cannot dismiss. Tangible, physical evidence." She extracted one specific page. "I know where they keep their records. The Brethren maintains a ledger of all activities, every ritual, every sacrifice, every member's participation. It ensures everyone is equally culpable. My father mentioned it years ago before he realized I would remember." "Where is this ledger?" "In the cellar. There is a concealed room beyond the main chamber. I never saw inside, but I overheard them discuss it. That is where they retain everything they cannot afford to lose." Ezekiel felt excitement mingled with dread. Such a ledger would be devastating evidence, but obtaining it meant venturing into the heart of the Brethren's domain. We would need to access it when the house is quiet. My father travels to Charleston monthly for business. The next journey is May 14th. He will be absent for 3 days. That allows us a fortnight to prepare. We require the cellar's layout, every room, every hiding place. I can assist. I have been contemplating this for 16 years. I know exactly what must occur. They spent an hour reviewing details, speaking in whispers. Catherine sketched the cellar's blueprint from memory. Ezekiel inquired about guards, keys, slave schedules. When he left her room, it was nearly 2 in the morning. He proceeded to his small chamber, mind racing. He was fully committed now to a conspiracy with a woman who was brilliant and damaged and frightening. He drew out the paper with his family's names and examined it by candlelight. "I am doing this for you. For Sarah, for Benjamin, for Ruth, for every person who has suffered because men like Silas Rutledge believe power grants them the right to demolish lives." He extinguished the candle and lay in darkness, listening to the house settle. Somewhere below, in a cellar he had never seen, resided secrets that could tear apart South Carolina's most powerful families. In 2 weeks, he would descend to find them. The fortnight passed with deceptive tranquility. Catherine continued improving. Her weight decreased. Her mind remained sharp. She walked farther each day. More importantly, she was translating sections of her coded journals for Ezekiel, filling in details about the Brethren that chilled his blood. "The Brethren is not unique to Colleton County," Catherine explained one afternoon. "It is part of a larger network across the South. Connected societies in Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond. Different names, but always the same structure. Wealthy men who believe their power derives from ancient practices of dominance and sacrifice. They believe they are continuing traditions dating back thousands of years, European mystery cults blended with knowledge learned from enslaved people. They distorted it into something monstrous. Justification for acts that have no justification. And the sacrifices, not always human, sometimes animals, but other times they take individuals who will not be missed. Slaves with no family, poor whites who wander onto their properties. Once I overheard my father mention a child, but I do not know if that was literal. Where do the bodies go? Swamps border every plantation. Bodies are deposited and never recovered. Alligators handle the remainder, and this ledger chronicles all of it. Every ritual for 40 years, names, dates, descriptions. They retain it because they require mutual complicity. Everyone equally guilty so no one can expose the others without destroying themselves. May 14th arrived. Silas departed for Charleston early in the morning, taking his carriage and manservant. He would stay with associates, attend to business, and was expected back on the evening of May 16th. That afforded them nearly 3 full days. They waited until nightfall before moving. The house settled into its evening routine. By 10, the main house was silent. They convened in Catherine's room. She had changed into simple dark attire that allowed freedom of movement. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She resembled someone preparing for battle. "Are you certain, miss?" "I have never been more certain. Let us proceed." The cellar entrance was in the kitchen behind the pantry. The door resembled wall paneling, but when pressed correctly, it clicked open, revealing narrow stairs descending into blackness. The odor struck them instantly. Damp earth, old smoke, and something organic and putrid. Catherine noted his reaction. "You grow accustomed to it. I wish I could claim you ceased detecting it, but I would be lying." They descended cautiously, Ezekiel carrying a shuttered lantern that provided minimal illumination. The stairs were steep and worn, the wood groaning. After 20 steps they reached the bottom. The cellar was more expansive than anticipated, easily 30 feet square with low ceilings supported by thick beams. The floor was packed earth, the walls lined with stones weeping moisture. At the center stood what Catherine termed the altar, though now it appeared as merely a heavy wooden table. But the dark stains on its surface and the grooves carved into its edges narrated their own story. Around the room stood candle holders, clay jars sealed with wax, wooden boxes, a rack holding black robes with crimson trim. Along one wall, shelves contained books and papers. Catherine moved with the certainty of someone following a memorized chart. She led Ezekiel to the far wall where the stones seemed solid, but she pressed one particular stone and something clicked. A section swung inward, revealing another chamber. This room was smaller, 10 feet square, and here the brethren hoarded its secrets. The ledger rested on a wooden stand at the center. Massive, 2 feet tall and 18 inches wide, bound in dark leather with metal clasps. Beside it were smaller journals. Around the walls were shelves containing jars Ezekiel refused to scrutinize too closely. "There," Catherine whispered, pointing. "That is what we require." Ezekiel moved to the stand and opened the book carefully. The pages were thick parchment covered in meticulous handwriting, names and dates extending back to 1800. Ritual descriptions inscribed in clinical detail, like scientific experiments rather than atrocities. He began reading, and with each entry his horror deepened. These men had not merely committed occasional violence. They had rendered it systematic. Regular gatherings every 6 weeks, rituals timed to agricultural cycles, convinced that blood nourished the land. They had slain at least 37 people over the years, probably more. Mostly enslaved individuals, but also poor whites, indigenous people, anyone vulnerable, and notes about consumption. They had not just murdered. They had eaten. Pieces of victims prepared in specific ways, consumed during ritualistic meals they believed transferred power. "Dear God," Ezekiel whispered, "this is worse than I envisioned. I attempted to warn you." Catherine's voice was flat. "I observed them when I was 12. I watched them carve pieces from that woman on the altar. I saw my father raise a goblet and drink. Then I spent 16 years being told I was insane, that I had imagined it all. But I always knew." Ezekiel turned pages searching for entries concerning his family. He located them in October 1838. 3 lines. Purchased family unit from Virginia. Woman Sarah. Children Benjamin and Ruth. Separated from male to demonstrate resolve. Sent to Alabama contact. Payment received. 3 lines. That was all his family's annihilation warranted. "We need to take this," Ezekiel said, his voice tight with fury. "No." Catherine's hand on his arm. "If we remove it now, they will know immediately. We need to copy the most crucial entries first." She was correct, but Ezekiel yearned to incinerate everything. Yet vengeance demanded patience, demanded being more cunning than the enemy. They spent 3 hours laboring. Catherine had brought paper and ink. She copied entries about specific rituals, concentrating on ones naming current members. Ezekiel documented victims, compiling a list of names and dates that could potentially be cross-referenced with other records. Exhausting work, worsened by the content. Several times Ezekiel had to halt, his hands shaking too violently. Once Catherine exited the chamber entirely, overwhelmed by memories. But slowly, methodically, they constructed their case. Page after page of evidence. They were so focused, neither heard footsteps on the cellar stairs. The first indication something was amiss was when light flared in the outer chamber. Lantern light much brighter than their single lamp. Ezekiel looked up sharply, his blood running cold. Silas Rutledge stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 other men. Behind them, at least 4 more figures in the main cellar. "I must confess," Silas said calmly, "I am impressed. I did not believe you would discover the inner chamber." Catherine stood slowly, positioning herself between her father and Ezekiel. "You were supposed to be in Charleston." "I was supposed to be, but I never trusted your miraculous recovery. So I made arrangements. I departed this morning, yes, but I returned this afternoon and observed the house all evening, waiting to see what you would do." He stepped into the chamber, the 2 men obstructing the exit. "Did you genuinely believe I would not anticipate this? That I would not prepare for the possibility you might remember, might seek retribution? You have been poisoning me for 16 years. Catherine's voice was steady despite everything. "And you expect me to simply accept that?" "I expect you to comprehend it was necessary. You witnessed something you should not have. A child. You could not understand. I could not permit you to demolish everything. I was 12, and I watched you murder a woman and consume her flesh. That was not terror, Father. That was a rational reaction to beholding evil." "Evil? Such a simplistic term." Silas moved further into the room, his eyes shifting between Catherine and Ezekiel. "And you, using my daughter to reach me, filling her head with notions of revenge." Ezekiel said nothing, calculating distances and odds. 7 men against 1, with Catherine in no state to fight. The situation appeared hopeless. Silas seemed to read his thoughts. "Do not attempt anything foolish. I do not wish to harm either of you. Not permanently, but I cannot allow this rebellion to continue." He gestured to the men behind him. "Bring them upstairs. We need to discuss what happens next." They were taken to Silas's study and locked inside together. The room was windowless except for one high transom impossible to reach. The door was heavy oak, locked from the outside. As soon as they were alone, Catherine moved to Ezekiel. "Are you injured?" "No, miss, but we are in grave trouble." "Yes, but not as much as you believe." She drew something from inside her dress, the papers they had been transcribing. "I managed to retain these. He did not search me. Too confident. That will not aid us if we are dead. We are not going to die. Not tonight." Catherine's eyes were calculating. "My father will desire to resolve this without killing me if possible. I am still his daughter, his blood. That provides us leverage." Over the next hour they heard arrivals, voices in the hall, men gathering. The brethren was assembling. Finally the door opened. Marcus Fanning stood there, his face grim. "They are prepared for you. Come peacefully and you will not be harmed." They were led down to the cellar again. This time, the main chamber had been transformed. All 13 brethren members were present, attired in ritual robes. Candles blazed in every holder. The altar was draped with crimson cloth. 13 chairs were arranged in a perfect circle, all occupied except Silas's at the altar's head. Ezekiel and Catherine were positioned in the circle's center, compelled to stand facing Silas. The other members observed with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Silas removed his hood. "Brothers of the Harvest, thank you for assembling on short notice. We confront a crisis. My daughter and her associate discovered our inner chamber. They saw the ledger. They were transcribing entries when I interrupted them." Judge Pelling spoke up. "Then they must be silenced permanently. This is not complicated." "I disagree." Silas raised a hand. "My daughter is blood. I cannot simply dispose of her without exhausting other alternatives. And the man represents an opportunity." "What opportunity?" Reverend Crenshaw inquired. "To test something I have long believed, that an individual can be drawn into our work through their own actions, if framed correctly." Silas turned to Ezekiel. "You desire vengeance against me. You wish to destroy me for what I did to your family. I comprehend that. But what if I proposed a different form of revenge, a more meaningful one?" "I do not understand," Ezekiel said carefully. "I am offering you membership, not as an equal. The Brethren does not accept men of color as full members, but as an associate. You would attend our gatherings, participate in rituals, and in exchange I would grant you what you want most. My family is deceased. You cannot give me what I want. No. But I can give you vengeance against the people who killed them. The plantation owner in Alabama who worked your wife and children to death. His name is Edward Gaines. He is not part of the Brethren. He possesses no protection from us. If you join us, prove your loyalty. I will furnish you resources to demolish him. Funds, intelligence, whatever you require to make him suffer as you have suffered." The offer hung in the air, obscene in its calculation. Join the men who had annihilated his family to obtain revenge on another monster. "And if I refuse? Then you and Catherine both perish tonight. Your bodies are deposited in the swamp. No one will ever learn what occurred. The papers Catherine was transcribing will be incinerated. Her journals destroyed. Everything continues as it always has." Silas spread his hands. "But if you accept, you live. Catherine lives. You obtain your vengeance. All it costs is your soul." Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her face was pale, but she gave him the slightest shake of her head. "Do not do it. Whatever happens, do not become them." But Ezekiel was contemplating accepting, about infiltrating their organization, about accumulating more evidence, about purchasing time. He looked back at Silas, then at Catherine. "What happens to her?" "She returns to her room, resumes her medications, forgets what she has witnessed. The alternative is she dies alongside you." "No." Catherine's voice sliced across the chamber. "I will not forget again. I will not be silenced. Murder me if you must, Father, but I will not pretend I do not know what you are." Silas's expression hardened. "Then you have made your choice." "Wait." Ezekiel spoke swiftly. "I accept. But on one condition, Catherine goes free. Not back to her room, free. Permit her to depart this house. Leave South Carolina. Provide her funds to begin anew. If you do that, I will join you." Several Brethren members shook their heads, but Judge Pelling spoke. "The boy raises a valid point. The girl is already broken. Even if she spoke, who would credit her? But a man willing to join us to become complicit, that is valuable. That demonstrates our power extends even to those who despise us." Silas considered. Finally he nodded. "Very well. Catherine will be sent north. I have associates in Philadelphia who will receive her. She will be given a new identity and a stipend to live on. But she can never return to South Carolina. Never contact anyone from her former life. She will be dead to everyone here." "Agreed." Catherine stared at Ezekiel. "No, I will not leave you to—" "Agreed." Ezekiel interrupted. "She goes free. I join you. Then we have a bargain." Silas turned to the others. "Catherine departs tomorrow. Ezekiel's initiation will occur in 3 weeks at the next regular gathering. Until then, he remains at Cypress Grove under surveillance. If he attempts to escape or contact anyone, the agreement is void and both die." "Understood." Ezekiel nodded. Catherine appeared as if she wished to argue, but Ezekiel caught her eye and shook his head slightly. "Trust me." Catherine left the following morning. A closed carriage conveyed her away at dawn. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window as it rolled down the lengthy drive and vanished into the trees. She had not been permitted to bid farewell. He had not been allowed to speak with her after the confrontation in the cellar. But as she had been escorted to her room the previous night, she had glanced back at him once, and in her eyes he had discerned something that offered hope. She understood. She knew he had not truly surrendered. She knew this was strategy, not defeat. The question was whether she would genuinely proceed to Philadelphia or whether she possessed her own schemes. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Ezekiel's existence. He was kept under perpetual watch. 2 overseers shadowed him everywhere. He was not permitted to leave the plantation grounds. He was assigned menial labor to occupy him, meaningless tasks that accomplished nothing but filled time. But he was also granted access to the main house, to the study where Silas retained his papers, to the cellar where the next gathering would transpire. They were observing him, yes, but they were also testing him, determining if he would attempt flight, if he would try sabotage. Ezekiel did neither. He performed the role of a defeated man who had made a pragmatic choice for survival. He was quiet, obedient, posed no questions, caused no disturbances. But he was scrutinizing everything, learning the household's routines, noting which slaves could be trusted, which overseers were cruel, which brethren members visited regularly. He was constructing a mental map of how everything functioned, searching for frailties. And at night, alone in his cabin, he contemplated what was approaching. His initiation would demand participation in their rituals. They would test him. They would desire to render him complicit in something horrific, so he could never expose them without destroying himself. He pondered how far he was willing to proceed, what boundaries he would not transgress, even for vengeance, whether there existed any act so terrible that justice did not justify it. He possessed no satisfactory answers to those questions. On June 2nd, the night before his initiation, Silas came to his cabin. It was late, past midnight. Ezekiel awoke to knocking and opened the door to find his owner standing there alone. "May I enter?" Ezekiel stepped aside. Silas entered and surveyed the sparse room. Finally he spoke. "Tomorrow you will become one of us. Not fully, never fully, but sufficiently. I want you to comprehend what that signifies. I understand what I agreed to. Do you? Do you truly?" Silas sat on the single chair uninvited. "The Brethren has existed for 43 years. In that time, we have never lost a member to exposure. Never had someone violate our code of silence. Do you know why? Because everyone is equally guilty, partly, but also because we care for one another. A man joins the Brethren and suddenly doors open. Business opportunities materialize. Legal troubles dissolve. Enemies find themselves in difficulty. We are not merely a society, Ezekiel. We are a network of power that spans the entire South. Once you are part of that network, even as an associate, you will possess access to resources you cannot envision. And in exchange, I assist you in murdering people." Silas did not flinch. "In exchange, you assist us in maintaining the natural order, the strong over the weak, the powerful over the powerless. That is how the world has always functioned. We simply acknowledge it and employ it to our advantage. You slaughtered my family to demonstrate your commitment to that order. I did, and I would do it again because sentiment is frailty. Love is frailty. The instant you allow yourself to care more about individuals than about power, you have already lost." Silas leaned forward. "But here is what I want you to grasp. Your family is dead. Nothing you do will alter that. But you can ensure their death signified something. You can utilize the power the Brethren offers to prevent other families from enduring the same fate. You can labor from within our organization to institute changes, to advocate for less brutal treatment of slaves, to campaign for improved conditions. You will possess a voice at our table that is worth something." It was nearly convincing, almost. The notion that Ezekiel could become some variety of reformer from within, employing his position to aid others. But he recognized it was a trap. A rationalization. The moment he participated in their rituals, he would be compromised. The moment he accepted their power, he would be corrupted by it. "Why are you informing me of this?" Ezekiel asked. "Because I want you to succeed. Because having you as an ally is more valuable than having you as an adversary. Because I executed your family, but I do not wish to execute you." Silas stood. "Tomorrow night you will be requested to perform something arduous." Something that will test whether you are genuinely committed to this path. I am telling you now, whatever you are asked to do, execute it. Do not hesitate. Do not display weakness, because if you fail the test, both you and Catherine die. Yes, I am aware she is not truly in Philadelphia. I know she is concealed somewhere, plotting her own retribution, but I have individuals watching for her. The moment she surfaces, if you have not proven yourself, she will be located and killed. Do you comprehend? Ice flooded through Ezekiel. Catherine was alive, but she was endangered, and his actions tomorrow would determine whether she lived or died. I understand, he said quietly. Silas nodded and departed without another word. Ezekiel sat alone in the dark cabin, contemplating the impossible position he occupied. He had to participate in something monstrous tomorrow, had to prove himself to monsters, had to become complicit in evil, or he had to discover another path, a third option that neither Silas nor the brethren anticipated. He withdrew the paper with his family's names and examined them in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for what I am about to do, for what I must become. I promise you it will not be for nothing." The gathering commenced at midnight on June 3rd. Ezekiel was brought to the cellar by 2 brethren members who stripped him to the waist and bound his hands behind his back. They escorted him down the stairs into the candle-lit chamber where all 13 members waited in their robes. Silas stood at the altar's head. "Brothers of the harvest, tonight we conduct an initiation unlike any in our history. We bring into our circle a man who has every reason to despise us. A man who has lost everything because of what we represent. We do this to demonstrate that our power extends even to our enemies, that anyone can be welcomed into the fold if the price is correct." He gestured, and 2 more brethren members brought forward a figure bound and gagged, struggling feebly. They positioned the person on the altar and stepped back. It was a young woman, enslaved, perhaps 18 or 19 years old, terrified. "This is your test, Ezekiel," Silas said. "To join us, you must participate in our ritual. You must take the knife and make the initial incision. You must prove that your craving for revenge against Gaines is stronger than your moral objections to our methods. If you refuse, you die here tonight. If you accept, you become one of us, and we assist you in destroying the man who slaughtered your family." The other brethren members began chanting, low, rhythmic sounds in a language Ezekiel did not recognize. The candles flickered. Shadows danced on the walls. Silas extended a knife. Long blade, wickedly sharp, handle wrapped in leather. "Take it. Make the choice." Ezekiel looked at the woman on the altar. She was weeping, attempting to scream through the gag. Her eyes found his, and in them he saw every enslaved person who had ever suffered at the hands of individuals like the brethren. He saw Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He saw himself. He looked at the knife, at Silas, at the 13 men observing to witness his decision. This was the moment, the point where he would either become a monster or perish resisting. But there was a third option, one he had been devising for 3 weeks, one that demanded perfect timing and absolute commitment. He accepted the knife. The brethren members nodded approvingly. Silas smiled. The chanting intensified. Ezekiel stepped toward the altar. The woman's eyes widened with terror. He raised the knife, and then he moved not toward the woman, but toward the nearest brethren member. The blade flashed in the candlelight and buried itself in the man's throat before anyone could react. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Ezekiel seized the fallen member's robe, yanking it off in one motion. He hurled it over the nearest candles, plunging half the room into darkness. Chaos erupted. He moved through the bedlam like violence incarnate. Years of rage concentrated into action. He grabbed another man, using him as a shield as someone swung at him. Hurled the body into 2 more members, tangling them, kicked out at a knee, heard bone crack, seized a candle holder, and smashed it into a face. The brethren were influential men, but they were not combatants. They were soft, privileged, accustomed to others performing violence for them. Ezekiel was none of those things. He fought toward the altar where the woman lay, grabbed her, severed her bonds with the knife he had somehow retained hold of. "Flee!" he shouted toward the stairs. "Flee!" She scrambled off the altar and escaped. Ezekiel turned back to confront the remaining brethren members, 7 of them still standing, blocking the staircase. "You have committed a grave error," Silas said, his voice steady despite the carnage. You have murdered yourself and Catherine both. Perhaps, Ezekiel said, but I will take as many of you with me as I can. What he did not know was that above them, in the main house, Catherine had returned. She had never proceeded to Philadelphia. She had been hiding in the slave quarters, waiting, plotting, rallying allies among the enslaved people of Cypress Grove. And when she heard the commotion from the cellar, when she saw the young woman burst from the kitchen screaming, she knew the time had arrived. The reckoning. Catherine had spent 3 weeks recruiting. She had moved from plantation to plantation under cover of darkness, speaking to enslaved people she had known her entire life, individuals who had watched her mature, who had suffered under her father's ownership. She informed them about the brethren, about the cellar, about the rituals. And she told them that tonight was the night they could terminate it. 23 individuals came, men and women who had nothing further to lose, who had lost children to the brethren's rituals, who had observed friends vanish into the swamps, who had endured decades of brutality from men who believed themselves untouchable. They arrived armed with tools from the fields, axes, scythes, hammers. They came with a fury that had been accumulating for generations. When the young woman burst from the cellar, Catherine led them down. The brethren members, still attempting to subdue Ezekiel, did not hear them approaching until it was too late. The enslaved people flooded into the cellar like a tide. There was no mercy in what ensued, no hesitation. These were individuals who had been informed their entire lives they were property, that their suffering was insignificant, that their lives held no value. Now they were proving how erroneous those convictions were. The brethren attempted to fight. Judge Pelling drew a pistol but was struck down before he could discharge it. Reverend Crenshaw pleaded for clemency and received none. Marcus Fanning tried to flee up the stairs and was dragged back down. Silas Rutledge, witnessing everything collapsing around him, attempted one final desperate maneuver. He seized Catherine, pulling her to him with a knife at her throat. "Halt, halt, or I slay her." The room stilled. Catherine looked at her father with no fear in her eyes. "Execute it, murder me." "It alters nothing. You have already lost. I can still escape. You can still nothing." Catherine's voice was icy. "You devoted 16 years to breaking me, to making me forget, to convincing me I was insane. But you failed. I remembered everything, and I'm going to watch you die." She drove her elbow back into his ribs with sudden, vicious force. His grip loosened. She spun away, and before Silas could recover, Ezekiel was there. They confronted each other, the enslaved man and the plantation owner. All the authority Silas had wielded, all the privilege and cruelty, all the years of believing himself untouchable. None of it mattered now. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said quietly. "My wife, my children, my existence. You did it for no reason, except that you were able to demonstrate something to men who valued cruelty over humanity." "Please," Silas said. Just that one term, pathetic and desperate. "Did my wife utter please? Did my son? Did any of the people you slaughtered in this cellar?" Ezekiel shook his head. "No mercy. Not for you. Not ever." What occurred next was brutal and final. The enslaved people ensured none of the brethren survived. 13 men who had believed themselves above consequence learned in their final moments that power was an illusion, that cruelty always returned home eventually. When it concluded, Catherine stood in the cellar's center encircled by corpses. She was trembling not from fear but from release. 16 years of fury finally granted an outlet. Ezekiel approached her. "Are you injured?" "No, are you?" "Minor lacerations. Nothing serious." He surveyed the carnage. "What do we do now?" "Now?" Catherine's smile was grim. "Now we incinerate it all. The cellar, the ledger, the evidence. We demolish every trace of what transpired here. But that evidence could substantiate what they did, could deliver justice." "Justice?" Catherine laughed bitterly. She looked around. "This is justice, the only variety we were ever going to obtain. If we attempt to transport that ledger to authorities, what occurs? We are hunted down and killed. The surviving brethren members in other counties pursue us. This only concludes if everyone believes the Cypress Grove chapter perished in an accident. If there is no evidence, no witnesses, no narrative to relate." She was correct, and Ezekiel knew it. "Then we burn it." They dedicated the next 2 hours to preparations. The enslaved people who had aided them departed before dawn. disappearing back to their respective plantations. They would remain silent. They had observed nothing. They knew nothing. That was how survival operated. Catherine and Ezekiel doused the cellar with oil, stacked wood and kindling, positioned the bodies in arrangements that might resemble an accident if anyone investigated. Then they took the ledger and all the journals and placed them at the altar's center. "Wait," Ezekiel said. He opened the ledger one final time and located the entries concerning his family. He carefully tore out those pages and folded them, placing them inside his shirt. "For them. So they are not forgotten," Catherine nodded. Then she took a candle and held it to the oil-soaked wood. The fire caught instantly. Within minutes the cellar was ablaze. They fled up the stairs and out of the house, standing in the yard, observing as flames engulfed Cypress Grove plantation. People would arrive. Other plantations would detect the smoke. There would be inquiries, but Catherine and Ezekiel had their narrative prepared. A dreadful accident. A candle knocked over in the cellar. The master and his guests trapped below. So tragic, so terrible. No one would ever learn the truth. As the sun ascended over the burning ruins, Catherine turned to Ezekiel. "What will you do now?" "Proceed north. Utilize the chaos of this fire to vanish. Perhaps locate others who desire to fight. To establish a network that can assist people in escaping." He withdrew the paper with his family's names. "I cannot restore them, but I can ensure others do not endure the same fate. And I will journey north as well. Employ the funds I have been pilfering from my father's accounts for years. Begin anew," she paused. "But I will not forget. I will document everything that occurred here. I will inscribe it all so that someday, somehow, someone learns the truth. They sealed the records. They will seal your testimony as well if you attempt to make it public. Then I will conceal it. I will encode it. I will leave it somewhere to be discovered decades from now when we are all deceased and it cannot harm us anymore." She looked at the burning house. "The truth possesses a way of surfacing eventually, even when people endeavor to enter it. They remained until the fire consumed itself, until Cypress Grove plantation was merely ash and blackened timbers, until nothing remained to indicate that 13 men had gathered there to commit atrocities. Then they walked away in opposite directions, Catherine north toward Charleston and eventually Philadelphia, Ezekiel west toward the frontier, where enslaved individuals could vanish into communities that posed no questions. They never encountered each other again. The official account was precisely as they had devised, a tragic accident. Silas Rutledge and 12 prominent gentlemen convening at Cypress Grove to discuss business when a fire erupted. All 13 perished in the cellar, overcome by smoke before they could escape. A terrible loss for Colleton County. Funerals with full honors, eulogies lauding their contributions to society. Catherine Rutledge was reported to have died in the fire as well. Her father's deranged daughter trapped in her room, unable to flee, a particularly sorrowful footnote to an already tragic incident. No one questioned it. No one examined too closely. The enslaved people who had participated remained silent. They possessed no motive to speak and every motive to maintain silence. Most were sold within months to different plantations as Cypress Grove was liquidated. They dispersed across South Carolina and beyond, carrying their secret with them to their graves. Years elapsed. The ruins of Cypress Grove were eventually demolished. The land was sold, new structures erected. Life progressed as it invariably does, obscuring the past with the present. But whispers persisted. Stories related in slave quarters late at night about the plantation where the masters burned. About the night justice visited men who believed themselves untouchable. About the woman and the man who made it happen. The tales altered with each telling, becoming legend, becoming myth. But the core remained. That cruelty bore consequences. That power was not absolute. That sometimes the powerless discovered their power. In 1863, during the Civil War, Union troops occupied the region where Cypress Grove had stood. They found indications of ancient tunnels beneath the property, discovered bones in the adjacent swamp, found markings on trees that suggested ritual sites. But the war advanced, and no one possessed the opportunity to investigate further. In 1971, during demolition work, a journal was discovered sealed within a wall. It detailed everything: names, dates, rituals, victims. But as Catherine had predicted, it was encoded, and before anyone could fully decipher it, the journal vanished from county records. Some assert it was destroyed. Others claim it was taken by descendants of the Brethren families, protecting their ancestors' secrets. A handful believe it still exists somewhere, awaiting rediscovery when the moment is opportune. What is known is this: 13 prominent men died in a fire in 1841. Catherine Rutledge disappeared shortly afterward, though no body was ever confirmed found. An enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross was reported sold to a plantation in Alabama, but no documentation of the transaction exists. And for years thereafter, stories circulated among enslaved communities about a network assisting people in escaping, led by a man who had confronted the monster and triumphed. Whether those narratives were factual or merely wishful thinking, no one can state with certainty. But sometimes truth resides not in official records, but in the stories people relate, in the memories they preserve, in the justice they recall, even when history endeavors to forget. This mystery reveals to us that power constructed on cruelty is never as solid as it appears. That secrets kept in darkness eventually find illumination. That the individuals deemed powerless often hold the most dangerous power of all, the power of witness, the power of memory, the power of refusing to forget. What are your thoughts on this account? Do you believe everything was disclosed? Do you think that journal still exists somewhere awaiting discovery? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you appreciated this tale and desire more dark historical mysteries like this, subscribe to this channel. Activate the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who adores mysteries that blur the boundary between history and horror. These narratives require remembrance. These voices deserve to be heard. We will see you in the next video.